Okay, wonderful. Welcome to our first Zehr Institute webinar of the semester. We are joined by Aviance Brown and Robyn Pratt of the Rooted Justice Collaborative, who are going to be sharing with us about restorative justice as anti-racist action and deep community grounding, and that the important work of building community in this time, especially, but really in all times. Um, I am DeMointe Wesley. I'm the Associate Director for the Zehr Institute. Again, I'm just going to be here running some of the tech. And if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, just go to the chat section, click where it says new chat, and send me a direct message, and I'll make sure that that gets to our presenters. All right. I'm going to keep introductions brief per the request of our presenters who are going to share a little bit more about themselves. Like I said, there's going to be a quick, about 25-minute presentation by Aviance and Robyn. And then we are going to get into Q&A. I'll have a few announcements, and then we'll get out of here. Like I said, it's going to be a quick little lunch and learn. So if you have your lunch, feel free to enjoy it during the presentation. Okay, so keeping it pretty brief, both Aviance and Robyn are restorative justice practitioners. Aviance is a movement lawyer, RJ practitioner, law professor who studies the intersections between race and restorative justice practices. And she will again share more about herself. And Robyn Pratt is an RJ practitioner with 9 years of experience working alongside communities across the country, focusing on equity-focused facilitation and creating learning spaces that center healing, deep discussion, and unlearning when needed. And so we are so grateful to have them both with us, their wisdom, and I am going to share one more slide just as a reminder to again send any questions or comments that you have to me via direct message during the presentation. But I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Aviance and Robyn. And thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you.
Awesome. Aviance, are you able to see the screen share?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Awesome. All right, y'all. Hello, hello. So happy to be here with you all and spending the next few moments, brief moments together to talk about deep community as an anti-racist practice. As DeMointe shared, Aviance and I are coming from Rooted Justice Collaborative. It is a heart project. It is a heart work that we are doing and really spreading the word and the importance of understanding restorative justice, not only as a community practice, not only as a practice used within the criminal legal system, but an anti-racist practice that is founded on building community values, shared norms, and really understanding to be able to address harm. And so when we say Rooted Justice Collaborative, rooted, we mean that we are grounded in racial equity. Justice is that everyone has everything that they need. And then collaborative, to be effective, we know that we must be in community. So at this point, we say community a couple times. And so we'll get into our conversation about community and just some agreements. I know this is not a training per se, but it is a space that we are coming together, a learning space, an unlearning space. And so we know it's important to have agreements. And so as a community, we are asking that we can all agree to staying engaged in whatever way that looks like for you all, whether that's having your camera on or off, having a pen and paper, having your phone to take notes. Speak your truth. So we will have an opportunity for folks to share throughout and use your I perspective, right? That I statement. What is coming up for you? What have you experienced? And be willing to experience discomfort. And so I always say I teach yoga, I teach restorative yoga in my free time. And I always tell folks in that yoga space to lean into discomfort and lean away from pain. So we're not asking you to lean into pain in this space, but we are recognizing that discomfort leads to growth. So lean into discomfort as we go through this conversation. And then finally, as Demointe shared, we have 25 minutes to share some information with you. So expect and accept non-closure, right? We won't get through all of the things. This is not even I wouldn't even say the tip of the iceberg. It's like right before the tip of the iceberg, and that's where we are today. So expect and accept non-closure, but know that the work can continue, right? We're bringing together EMU, the Zehr Institute, folks across the country to be able to continue this conversation about the importance of deep community.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robyn. So, yeah, as she said, RJC is here. We're learning and growing in community, and we offer trainings. And so, this is just like she said, the tip of the iceberg of one of the trainings that we offer on RJ as an anti-racist practice to communities all over the country. And so, in assessing community, I want us to ask this question: Who are your people? Who are my people? When thinking about who is in my community, there is a long list of questions that you could ask. Here are just a few. Who do I run to share exciting news with? When I'm bursting with energy and I want to tell somebody, who is that? Whose growth and goals are connected to mine so that we can move forward together? If I wanted to share a warm meal with somebody, who would I call? If I were arrested, if I got arrested right now, who would I call? Who can I share my most intrusive thoughts with? When I want a different worldview, who do I call? And again, this is just a subset of a large list of questions that we ask when assessing community. Because it's easy for us to look at family or those who are immediately right there beside us. But truthfully, family may not be the people that you go to for certain things to answer in answers to these questions. You know, some folks don't have family. That community and the whole rounded perspective of who my people are, I think lies deeply in who we connect with the most, who we are when we can be our most authentic selves. And asking some of these questions can help us in that assessment. So for me, you can move forward, Robyn. I have been thinking through who my people are as preparing to talk to you all about this. And I am blessed to have a large group of people that are in my community. One of them specifically is a group of moms in my neighborhood. So I'm a mom, a toddler mom. We've all got little kids, and we have connected over many things. Moms and wine is a common thing. And so I have been called to lean into this particular community to do life with as we transition and understand life. And recently we have kind of just had some shifts in our group values. Norms and values kind of establish naturally as you come and bring people together. What do we have a common? What do we have alike? Lately, I've been challenged in this group because I'm learning that the way that we do and see community looks different. Community and friendship for me is, who do I do life with? And I mean, like, all in. I tend to see friendship and community not in the sense of, if I call you, we're doing catch ups every time at once a month. Who am I doing deep life with? Um, who can I put on my child's dentist form when I need an emergency contact person? Is it in this mom group? And for me, that question has been yes. But lately, we've been challenged. And I had a friend who said, the way that you're looking at this community is a little skewed. Some people only see this as a group that we bring the toddlers together in. And you see this group very deeply. You are like, how can I support you? If you need somebody to come watch my kid, how can I show up into that space? And she said, well, maybe you need to take a step back in the way that you see what this community is for you, because I think you're doing it a little too deeply. And that hit me. And, truthfully, I've been like wrestling with that, but I've since challenged back and said, actually, I'm going to take it as a challenge to, shift the way that you all see the way that we do community. It should be the people that I can come to for a warm meal. We live in the same neighborhood. Shouldn't just be a space for getting the toddlers together and having a glass of wine when we're stressed, right? let's shift. And so I am actively working through this as I'm teaching you all to be values aligned and to establish a group of core values with this group of people because these are my people, they my neighborhood. I have nowhere else to go. And so this is something that I'm actively working with right now with my own neighbors. And I think that is super important. I want to challenge you all to know your neighbors if you don't. That is a restorative practice in and of itself. Do you know the people who are around you? How do you get to know these people? I think deep community work, as Robyn is going to define for us in a second here, is the answer to a lot of what we're seeing right now. If we look back at historical movements that change the trajectory of society, you never go at it alone. If you look and study, like large historical change making movements, community is always the answer. And so I'm seeing that right now, a strong need for that as we have the natural instinct in this country to dive into self and individualism. The way that you fight things like fascism, the way that you fight things like what we're seeing happening all around is to connect with the people around you. And so I really want to challenge you all to do that today, Robyn.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Aviance. And I think as Aviance and I were putting this presentation or this webinar together, and we were grappling with what is community? What does it look like? What does it feel like? We are both like learners at heart, and we always want to be in a space of learning. And we asked ourselves, let's look up, what does community mean? At its root, what does community mean? And so just wanted to share with you all those findings of at its root, community is broken into two parts: calm or coming together or being with, and then munis, a service, duty, or contribution. And so when you put those words together, it's really to share duties, gifts, and responsibilities together. And so if we using that definition, right, I'm like the power of words and thinking about the ways that we view community. I'm like, man, do I always come together to share responsibility with others? Oh, I don't know that I do. Not always, right? Do I come together to share gifts? And this is not saying that community is not rest, right? Or community is not pause, or community is not a space that you can show up and just be. But we do know that in practicing community well, we have a duty to the people in that community. And so we started with asking and really sitting with, right, and having you all think about in your own time, alone time, as you look back on this webinar, who your people are. Who are your people? Who do you call when you are under the weather? Who do you call when you're having a bad day? Who do you call when you're having the best day ever? So you got to know who your people are to then start to build out what does community look and feel like. And so, some questions that we can take deeper and wanting to offer you all as you go on this reflective journey of building deep community or rebuilding or building a stronger community is really being honest with yourself about the ways that your view of community may or may not have shifted post COVID, right? And so we have many conversations at a larger level of the ways that community has shifted, as the ways that people, even in neighborhoods, come together in churches. I know for me, I'm from Virginia, but I moved to North Carolina, and that's where Aviance and I met each other. And one of the hardest things for me post COVID was finding a church house and a church that I could go into the building, because most of the churches that I was looking at, they were still meeting virtually in 2022, right? Because of the fear. There's many vulnerable folks who come into the church house, from older folks to folks who are immune compromised. And so they were like, we are going to meet virtually. And I struggled with that. And it impacted not just my community in the way that I was able to connect in community, but it also impacted my spiritual self. And so just asking yourself, right, doing this assessment of who your people are, has your community view shifted post COVID? And then how has that shifted the ways that you feel connected to or isolated to people who are like you, or people from other races or ethnicities around you? And so in thinking about this, right, and in doing this reflective work, we know that what we are feeling and experiencing and witnessing at a small scale is impacted up and is also impacted down to us. And so we wanted to be honest in having this conversation, that we know that community doesn't happen in a vacuum. It also doesn't happen outside of what's happening in the world. And so idea that we wanted to share with you is this amazing idea from Adrienne Marie Brown and the work that she did with emergent strategy in this idea of community fractals. And so when you're thinking about who your people are, how did those people become your people? Was it because of the views that you've had growing up around what community could be, about what was possible in community? How has it shifted post COVID? And then how does what happens at the small scale in your local community then impact, right? How does that ripple out and then come back? And so, what Adrienne Marie Brown offers is that how we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale. The patterns of the universe repeat at scale. There is a structural echo that suggests two things. One, that there are shapes and patterns fundamental to our universe. And two, that what we practice at a small scale can reverberate to the largest scale. And so when we think about this work, it's important to think about the factors outside of ourselves that then impact community, and then how that impacts how we show up in community with ourselves and others, and really grounding in this work as an anti-racist practice. And so with that, right, with that idea of fractals, I'm going to pass it back to Aviance to really ground us in some definitions around this work.
Yeah, so I know you all saw the flyer and thought racism, and y'all are like, when are they going to get to it? Now is it. We're going to transition to talking about how we do this work in building community and in healing harm that has been done through an anti-racist lens. And Robyn, when you were just sharing that, it really challenged me with thinking about the fractals, because right now in this moment, I see so much value in having people with different perspectives, different views, right? One of the questions at the bottom was, who do you go to for a different worldview? And I think I'm particularly stuck with that because of the polarizing kind of nature of society at this particular moment, where having somebody with a different worldview than you could have larger impacts. And so I'm struggling with that internally right now. It's like, how do I bring in people and cultivate community with people who don't have every single belief that is just constantly serving as like this echo chamber for me, right? I want people to challenge me, but I want people to do it in a way that um kind of edifies my humanity. It's not demoralizing. And so I'm particularly grappling with that right now. And so just wanted to ground in the definition of racism, because we're going to talk about racism as we transition here. And I just want to make sure we have a shared understanding of what it is. So this is how we define it. And this definition was taken from the Racial Equity Institute. Racism, social and institutional power combined with race prejudice. It is a system of advantage for those considered white and of oppression for those who are not considered white. It is a white supremacy system. You can go to the next one. When we say white supremacy, what do we mean? White supremacy is the widespread ideology baked into the beliefs, values, norms, and standards of our groups, our communities, our towns, our states, our nation, teaching us both overtly and covertly that whiteness holds value. Whiteness is value. And then at the bottom here, there's an illustration that says, the longer you swim in a culture, the more invisible it becomes. And to illustrate this, I want you all to join me briefly for a story. If I were to go fishing with a buddy, I've never been fishing before, but if I go fishing with a friend, we go out there, we get to the lake. I am tossing my rod out there. I reel something in. I am beaming with excitement that I caught one. I pull it up. I look and I see that my fish is dead. I go, that's odd. I take it off my hook. I throw it back out there. My buddy is with me. And, they say, are you going to try again? I say, sure. I go back out. I reel in another one. And guess what? That one is dead too. I start to grow concerned. My friend reels in a fish, realizes that their fish is also dead. We start to question what is happening here as our concern grows. Does anybody know what the question is that we're asking? The question that we're asking is not what's wrong with these fish. The question that we're asking is what is wrong with this lake? Is this lake contaminated? Is it poisoned? There has to be something in this lake that is contaminating all of these fish, considering that each and every one of them is coming up dead. And in our society, we ask, what is wrong with this fish? And what is wrong with that fish? And what is wrong with that one? And we create programs and policies and institutions to fix the fish rather than creating something to fix and analyze that lake. And so when we talk about the lake that is contaminating and poisoning and killing all of this fish, we are talking about the system of white supremacy and the culture of white supremacy that is ingrained in every facet of society. And yes, there are certain fish that can survive these conditions. The talented 10th can come up and rise and survive here and there, oftentimes not unscathed. There are a few, but largely we should be analyzing the lake to figure out how it is that all of us can thrive and survive.
Yeah. And so thinking about these definitions of racism and white supremacy, right? Thinking about the ways that the larger informs the small and the small informs the larger, we wanted to share with you all just some ways, some of the ways that white supremacy culture shows up. Not just at a larger scale, but how does it show up in community? How does it show up in community with yourself? How it shows up in community with others? And so, some of the ways that white supremacy culture can show up in building deep community is this belief that there's only one right way, right? This is the one right way that we should be doing things, and there is no other way. It can show up in perfectionism, progress being bigger or more, having this sense of urgency, right? If community isn't happening in 2 weeks, then it's something has to be wrong. A fear of conflict or right to comfort. And one that I want to emphasize and or come back to and emphasize is cancel culture, right? We see this so much in social media when somebody causes harm, right? And the harm is real. Oftentimes there's this language around they're canceled. We have canceled them. We are no longer seeing and believing in their humanity, and they are no longer worthy of my time. And then thinking about the ways that shows up in the community that we share when conversations get hard, when they get uncomfortable, right? We might be like, we might not say we're canceling them, but we're like, ooh, I'm gonna take a step back, or I'm not gonna be able to do that any longer. They are not getting it. They don't understand. And so we know white supremacy culture does have an antidote, right? We don't have to stay believing and thinking and showing up in the same way. And the antidote to that is restorative justice.
Yeah, Robyn, thank you. In building community and shifting the way that we see community, one of the things that you were just speaking of, Robyn, or hinting at, I think, is the fact that community is inconvenient. That is the reality. Building and being in community requires sacrifice. And I think it's important that you connected that post-COVID piece because we got so used to easily tapping on a link and just joining and that being it. But the reality is we have to be inconvenienced to do it right and to do it deeply. It is not convenient for me to stop in the middle of the day and go up to my mom neighbor's friend to help watch her baby while she has an interview because she can't currently afford childcare. That's inconvenient for me, but I'm going to do it. And so restorative justice as the antidote to white supremacy culture, as you were just describing, is so key as we talk about building community and bringing in restorative practices. So restorative justice is a philosophy and set of practices rooted in indigenous teachings that emphasize our interconnection by repairing relationships when harm occurs while proactively building and maintaining relationships to prevent future harm. And that last piece is so key in terms of the community part. We can go to the next one. When we think about restorative justice and restorative practices as the antidote to white supremacy culture, these are some of the things that we can talk about. And again, we talk about this at length in our training, but we are under a time crunch, so I'm gonna go through this quickly. When we talk about only one right way of doing things and either or thinking, the antidote to that is what we see in restorative practices. There are multiple solutions. There are multiple truths. There are multiple things and nuanced ways of talking and having discussions that can lead us ultimately to where we're going. And perfectionism and cancel culture. This is countered through trust building, through deep relationship building, through learning from our mistakes and not tapping out. When we talk about things like white supremacy culture, it gets super uncomfortable, particularly for white folks. And how do you lean into that discomfort, as Robyn was describing, rather than tapping out and saying, I'm going to stay the whole time? Progress is bigger slash more, and there's a sense of urgency. We always have to be on under that culture. Robyn, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah,
Seven
okay.
generation
Making sure I
thinking.
was off mute. Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, one of the ways that I connect with restorative justice and have has been shared with me is this idea of seven generation thinking, an indigenous way of thinking about community, right? An indigenous practice is really building a community that then serves people and honors people seven generations into the future. And so oftentimes when I just think about things in general, I can see things maybe one or two generations. I'm like, oh, this might be helpful for my kids. I cannot think of many systems, many ways of being at a larger scale that I can say, man, this is going to really serve folks seven generations from now.
Yeah, yeah. And then in terms of the next one, the fear of conflict and the right to comfort, this is something that comes up often. How do we normalize and address harm? How does our discomfort lead to growth? And how do we do this work in a way that is rooted in values? Because if we are aligned in values, then we can work through things that are challenging for us. And so these are just some of the ways that restorative justice can be the antidote to white supremacy culture.
Yeah, so we are looking at the time and coming to the end of our time. We want to leave you with something, and that is this beautiful practice of freedom dreaming. This term freedom dreaming was coined by historian Robyn D.G. Kelley. The term freedom dreaming is used to describe the power of imagination as a tool for individual and collective liberation. Freedom dreaming is about visualizing a future of joy and liberation for all people, where those who are marginalized are leading and celebrating. Freedom dreaming asks us to dream in pretty distinct ways, right? Dreams of dismantling. So if we think about all the ways that white supremacy culture shows up in building community, what is the dream to dismantle those ideas? That idea of there's only one right way, the idea that we have to have a sense of urgency in all that we do. And then on the other side, freedom dreaming calls you to dream of what needs to be built, right? So we think about, I'll speak for myself, I think about this needs to be torn down and this system needs to be torn down and this system is a mess. And I leave little space, right, to think about what needs to be replaced. And who do I need to be in community with to really dream of this in a way that is inclusive and equitable for everyone? And so we wanted to leave you all with some reflection questions. And I know this is being recorded and we can share these questions out with Demointe to be able to share with the larger community, but just some questions to to keep in mind of what does a community rooted in justice, care, and belonging look and feel like to me? What does it look like to have a caring, just community with myself? What does it look like to have that with my family? What does that then look like to show up in my workplace, in my church, in the community events that I'm a part of? What does it look like to design a community without fear, shame, or exclusion? What values would guide it? And then we broke this down into really some questions for you to think about as a white person freedom dreaming, right? That dreaming looks a little bit different when we start to think about the work that needs to happen for people of color and thinking about how you have been shaped to see yourself in relation to communities of color, right? Going back to the racism and white supremacy culture. In your freedom dream, what does it look like to show up in a community without control, dominance, or centering yourself? And so, as a white person, really thinking about again, what does it look like for me to take a step back and leverage my privilege to make deep community possible for everyone? And then, as a person of color, right, what does safety, rest, and community look like for you? In your freedom dream, how are cultural traditions, ancestral practices, or spiritual wisdom alive in community? And so taking some time, a lot of this work is around reflection. It's around having conversations, having that uncomfortable conversations. You've identified your people, right? You have identified the ways that community may have been stopped or changed or skewed because of the impacts of what's happening in the world. And we say post COVID, but we can also say post the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. We can say post so many different things in the ways that that may have impacted community, and then taking some time to dream, to reflect, and not to mistake reflection for action in and of itself, but as a starting place to then put a plan in place of what we want to build up as a community. And so we're gonna leave you with that. And Aviance, is there anything you would add before we open up to some questions?
Yeah, we took the quote out, but I want to add the quote back. This is just so important. If you're
Yes.
doing restorative justice work, it's imperative that you're not just tapping into this community to do the work and then tapping out. True restorative work, restorative justice work has to be done through an anti-racist lens. You have to see yourself as an anti-racist worker to be doing it well. And so the quote by Lila Watson is, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together."
Mm. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Aviance and Robyn, for that wisdom that you shared with us, for being a channel for wisdom from others. Um, so we have a little bit of time for questions, and again, feel free to send them to me. We had a reflection um, sent to me, and I wanna ask a question around this reflection. So it was shared. I appreciate the fish lake analogy. What I'm so concerned about is that I believe that people in power know the lake is poisoned for non-white fish, yet come up with new ways of gaslighting the public that it's the individual fish, people of color's failure to thrive. And so sort of thinking about, restorative justice as you framed it, as an anti-racist practice, what are the ways that we can lean into restorative justice and into community building to sort of get around or as an antidote to that gaslighting that this comment sort of speaks about? If you have any sort of thoughts there.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I'm so thankful that you phrase it that way in particular. Because when we talk about the community building, I think we kind of speaking at a high level, but when you dive like into the granular parts of like what does that actually look like? What does it look like for me to be building community as a form of resistance? That looks like me, and I do this all the time. I go to my neighbor's house and ask for things that I don't actually need. I'm like, hey, you got some flour? I'm baking this cake. I am doing little things, little granular things that build up into us having trust, and then me having them into my home for us to discuss fascism and white supremacy. It is like doing all these little things that I'm very intentionally doing right now in all of the spaces that I'm in. And so I recognize that in certain spaces, like in your workplace, right, it may not be possible to talk about certain topics. It may not be appropriate, particularly because of how the funding is being distributed and all the things. But community building deep community and doing life together is a form of resistance work. And so if you're intentional about how you're doing it, you are pushing back against that lake. And I think whoever asked that question is right. The power players do know, and it's this kind of master manipulating tool that is being used. And so, how do we acknowledge that in our conversation? How do we not go around that? How do we acknowledge it and consciously push up against it at all times? Say, I'm not going to accept that.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that is also like knowledge is power, right? So making sure that when we're having conversations about race and racism and white supremacy culture, that we're taking the time, right? It takes time to make sure that we're coming in with the same information, right? So if someone's coming in believing the leadership is doing all that they can, and you're coming in with this belief that, oh, leadership knows that the water is poisoned, where do we come together, right, and have that friction to get to some shared understanding around the realities so that we can then move forward into doing some of that dismantling and some of that building up. And I just to share this example, over the weekend, I did a mental health training, and one of the things that came up is around, an older white gentleman shared that why wouldn't leadership invest all that they can in people's mental health in historically under-resourced communities, knowing that when you invest in people's mental health, his point of view was they do get a return on their investment because then more people are working and more people are living a healthy life. And it was a beautiful space. It was not just my thoughts, but 30 other people in the room were able to offer him that that is not the return that they want. That is not the return that many people want. Right, it pays for people to be sick. It pays for people to not be able to show up and work. It pays for these things. And for him in that moment, I could literally see a light bulb go off of like, oh, that makes sense, right? That is helpful information. And then of course we can offer in facts and data and all of those things, but you have to come in willing to unlearn, to grapple with some hard truths, and come to that shared understanding in moving forward with this work.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you both for those reflections and those questions. There was a bit of a follow-up, but I almost think that you kind of answered it. And it was how do we actually identify the ways that those in power, the systems of power, gaslight us? And I do think what you're sharing around gathering a shared perspective, a shared understanding, when we are coming in with more shared knowledge, it is much more difficult for a people who are sort of together to be led astray. Um,
Yeah.
so maybe, I mean, in Aviance, you shared in your own community some sort of micro practices. Are there other practices to maybe restorative justice practices that lend themselves to building this shared understanding even more?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I want to go back just really quickly on what you were saying because that looks different with who you're talking to. I think when trying to talk to people who do not share the same values as you, as Robyn was just highlighting with the people in power, that adds in a layer of complication. I'm talking to somebody who does not see things the way that I do. So how do I speak on their language? And that is hard for me because, for example, I was trying to do some work to get some legislation changed. And I live in a red state. That is just the reality. And so I had to talk to them in dollars, like for prison reform. That's not what I wanted to do because that is not aligned with me. But the reality is, the audience that I was talking to did not care about bodies, but and humans. So when I talk to them and I'm speaking in dollars, how do I infuse my message deep within there? So as I'm talking, like you hear the dollars as the high point, but I'm also going to connect why the actual human life, like it's really a mind-boggling thing exercise to engage in, but being strategic as you're building community to talk to people who don't speak the same language as you is that deep work. And then employing RJ practices. I think as Robyn highlighted, RJ is an indigenous practice, and so how are we always studying what those communities were doing? It came to this Western world and we've adopted it and kind of added this westernized twist to the way that we put it in schools and in prisons and in the courts. But it has kind of shifted a bit from its original intended purpose. So how am I conscious of how indigenous people were practicing RJ? And they didn't call it RJ, but what they were doing was RJ. And am I studying what the indigenous communities were doing and how they were doing it to ensure that I am not doing this practice a disservice? And so that being that type of values aligned and connecting with its original intended purpose, I think is kind of how you begin to connect that point.
Yeah, and I think one additional thing that I would add to what Aviance shared is when doing that deep listening, right, then believing what people are saying. So it could have been a very different conversation if in talking with the gentleman over the weekend, if he pushed back on every single thing, if he stayed true, right? Once 30 people with different identities, different racial and ethnic backgrounds shared, no, here's a reality. Right. I live in this under resourced community. I lived in this historically underserved community. Here's a reality. And as a white person, as a person with privilege, then your role in that is to then to believe them and take that lesson to other folks who look like you and who are in similar positions of power to then really make some change for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you again for that last reflection. It's funny, y'all have a sort of clairvoyance that you will answer the next question that I was going to ask. You kind of already addressed this, but I still want to give voice to this question. And so this person is thanking you for the last quote that you shared. And they ask, as a white woman, I'm doing anti-racism work with the understanding that ending sexual violence requires dismantling white supremacy. I also recognize that my role must be thoughtful and responsible. I don't want to take up space that isn't mine or approach this work in ways that center me. Beyond providing funding and logistical support, I'm asking, how do I participate in a way that is accountable, respectful, and grounded in the truth that my own liberation is bound up in dismantling white supremacy? And so I think you've given some voice to that, but if you have other thoughts to share to that notion.
Mm, whoever wrote that, right on. Love that. Robyn, do you want to go? I've been talking first a lot.
Yeah, I think it's, and just you have a level of self-awareness that is so important in coming into these spaces and doing this work. And that's a great place to start. You know, um, yeah, you are just aware of that. It's really I had to take a deep breath because I don't know that everyone comes into the spaces and works that they're doing in helping fields and in the sexual assault and domestic violence sectors of our nonprofit world having that understanding of the connection between the anti-racist work and the work that you're trying to do. So just having that awareness is so great. I heard dollar signs. That's also really great. I'm like, funding, yes, you're right in the right place. And then the other thing that I would just maybe add is that when there is a space of mostly black and brown people, right, taking a listening role, taking that seat, that listening space, and taking that back seat. And then when you are in spaces with white folks, when you are in spaces with people that are in power, taking a leadership role to say, hey, this is what I heard. This is what people are saying, right, who are most impacted. This is what they believe the solution is. If you're not able to bring those people to the table, right, and this idea of the table, it can be a whole nother conversation, but if you're not able to bring them into the room, right, then speaking on their behalf and getting that permission to say, hey, can I share this in my next leadership meeting? Can I share this in my next meeting and talking about where we should be allocating funds? um, is really another great place for you to go once you've had these meetings, once you've sat with the people, taking that information, not holding on to it, right, but taking it and sharing it as a tool.
Demointe, before I hop in, were there more questions?
No, I think that will be our last question. So,
Okay. The last piece, and Robyn gave the how to this, but I just wanted to pull out that what you're doing when you do those specific things is building trust. So in the larger training that we do through RJC, we talk about the importance of trust building as you're engaging in RJ work. And so if you are whether you're in a leadership position or not, when you are doing deep community building, you have to build trust. And so going into that space with your ears rather than with your mouth is imperative for it, like engaging in that way. Like I always tell like some of my white friends who are wanting to do this work, don't be weird. Like don't be weird. Like um one of I'll share this story. I normally don't, but one of the stories that I share is this, it was very clear that there was someone who was trying to build community with me, a white woman, and she came up and was like, "Oh my God, have you heard the new Beyonce album?" And it's like I get that as a point of connection, but you could have just said, "Hey girl, what's your name?" Like, you don't have to rack your brain thinking of all the black facts in your mind. And that has happened to me so many times. My first day at my first corporate job, they said, "Hey, I have the best story. My son was played MLK in last night's school play." And it's just like, that's not a good story to me. You don't know me to think like I don't care. There are so many things that we can talk about to just see each other as humans and connect on that level to build trust. That lets me know that your liberation is bound up in mine and you see it that way. Just talking to me and building deep trust. Um, so whoever asked that question, thank you for that, and good luck to you on your journey. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing, especially if you're coming at it with that mindset.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to double tap on that point of like, as we are building connection and community, starting from where you are, like we all come into this work with something. You don't have to pull from other people, other races, other cultures. You can start with what you have. It is valuable. It is just about how you use it, how you frame it. So thank you, Aviance and Robyn, so much for sharing your time with us. I know you are both so incredibly busy, so taking even this amount of time to share with our community is so amazing. Anything that you want to share before I move to sort of Zehr Institute business? Yes, thank you for the claps I see coming across the screen. Anything else you want to share with us, how people can get connected to you and your work?
Yeah, we're always happy to stay connected and ask questions, answer questions, and we want to build community with, as many people who are doing this work as possible. So you can check our website out. It's rootedjusticecollaborative.com, and feel free to hit us up, especially if you want us to come in and train your org on how to do RJS anti-racist work. But really in sharing and reflecting on today's thoughts, if you have thoughts or concerns or questions, feel free to shoot us a message on the site.
Thank you so much. And thank you for dropping that link, Robyn. Again, this webinar will be posted to our YouTube, so please come back and get all of the wisdom that is there. I want to share just a quick closing a bit of information to say if you are new to the Zehr Institute, we do webinars regularly, usually about once a month. Usually they're on Wednesdays, sometimes a little bit longer in various topics. Our next one will be on October 15th, and it will be about gun violence, restorative justice, and community healing with the great folks, some of the great folks at Drums No Guns, Dr. Ron Bagat. So very excited about that. So visit our site to stay updated, get connected to our emails, and we will be happy to get some information to you. Thank you again so much for coming. Feel free to watch this webinar back. Yeah, be well. Enjoy the rest of your lunch. If you didn't get lunch, go nourish yourself. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care, y'all.